Hi, and thank you for being here today. My name is Amy Bryant of Parenting Beyond Punishment and Wild Child Counseling, and I'm a psychotherapist here in Atlanta, Georgia, at Wild Child Counseling, and I also do parenting education online worldwide through Parenting Beyond Punishment. I am here today with my collaborator, Robbyn Bennett, and we are really excited to have a special guest with us today. Robbyn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Robbyn, and I am a psychotherapist here in Portland, Oregon. And I'm also the founder of StopSpanking.org, which is an online resource to help people understand the harm of spanking and better neurodevelopmentally informed alternatives. I'm also on the board of the U.S. Alliance to End the Hitting of Children, which is an organization that's aimed at protecting children's rights and ensuring that we end all violence against children. And it's exciting to be here today.
It's so exciting.
Yeah,
I'm so
wonderful.
excited, Robbyn. Thank you.
Yes.
So Robbyn, a couple of years ago, introduced me to the work of Dr. Joan Durrant, and we spoke about her work that year. It was really an exciting time. And so I am just really excited that Dr. Joan Durrant is here with us today to talk with us about her work. Dr. Durrant is a child clinical psychologist, and she's a professor of community health sciences in the College of Medicine at the University of Manitoba in Canada. Her research focuses on the psychological, cultural, legal, and human rights dimensions of corporal punishment of children worldwide. She also co-created Positive Discipline in Everyday Parenting in collaboration with Save the Children Sweden. And when you got your reminder email this morning, there was a link to that, so some of you may have already checked it out. Dr. Durrant, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. I was so honored to be invited, and I share your excitement about what this conversation may bring.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is why it's important for us to even know what our long-term parenting goals are. Why is that important for us to know when we're making our decisions about parenting?
Well, you know, when I was parenting my son, who's now almost 22, when he was little, I became really conscious of the conflict that I was constantly feeling between what was going on in this very moment right now and what I actually wanted him to learn for his future. So it seemed to, it just became something that was so apparent to me that all of those moments of tension and conflict and frustration really brought home to me that I had a really tough decision in each of those moments between trying to change what was going on right now, this very instant, and what I really want to teach him as a growing person. So, you know, those moments when oh gosh, all parents have them many, many times a day, where you basically don't know what to do, but you feel this incredible drive to get into control of the situation and to control the child. And that is such an intense drive because you hate the feeling of being out of control. But everything that you do to try to control that behavior in the moment works against what you're really trying to do with your parenting. So if you grab the child hard and say, stop that right now, or you spank them, or you shout at them, or you say, how many times do I have to tell you? Every one of those things is actually teaching the child the opposite of what we really want children to learn. And that, for me, became kind of the crux of the parenting dilemma and the parenting challenge, because you have to somehow come to terms with that drive for control. Because if you act on that kind of primitive impulse to just shut it down, you're teaching the opposite of what you want the child to learn. So when I started really reflecting on what do I really want to accomplish in this whole parenting adventure, it was to end up with a person who can handle conflict well and who doesn't coerce other people and who is empathic and non-aggressive and non-violent and good at communicating and good at problem solving. And there is me trying to control, coerce, not have empathy, not see things from his point of view, not communicate well, and implant messages in his brain that were the opposite of where I wanted to go. So I became just intensely aware of the need to refocus my mind on what I want to accomplish in child rearing, not in this second of my stressful day, but what I want to accomplish on my parenting process, my parenting journey, if you will, and how those moments where you're wanting to clamp down, control, and coerce, how those moments are actually the moments when you teach those things. So I realized that when everything is going well and everybody's happy, it's easy. But it's in those moments of conflict, frustration, stress, I've got to get out the door, all those things, that's when I have the golden opportunities to actually teach him how to moderate his emotions, how to get hold of himself, and how to interact with another person, especially a person weaker than he is, in a moment when I'm frustrated by whatever they might be doing. So they're golden teaching moments that we probably lose 99% of those teaching moments, and as a result, we are over and over and over again throughout our day implanting messages and scripts and models of exactly what we don't want our children to do.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it so true? And I think as a parent, every one of us can relate to those moments, the pivotal moments when we go, I just have to get control of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then
to get control of the child.
Right,
yeah.
The child. And really what we have to do is we have to get control of ourselves. Right?
Yeah, because if we think, well, okay, one day soon, he's going to be in a situation where somebody's doing something that doesn't meet his agenda or doesn't, make everything go smoothly for him. Mm-hmm. So how's he going to learn how to deal with that without shouting, yelling, name-calling, hitting, and controlling, coercing?
Joan, I was thinking about how when I was a mother, a young mom, I was really very concerned about being a good mom. I was worried a lot about that, and also about my children being good. And I think that fear that that people are going to judge me, that they're going to see my child behaving in a way that they're going to go, that kind of criticism that just feels like it's everywhere when you're a young mother or a mother of a young child. What can you say about that piece of it? Because I think a lot of times when we're trying to seek control, we're trying to preserve our sense of self as a mother and not feel ashamed of our children.
I think that's a huge piece of it when we're in public or when we're with family members. We feel this judgment, which may or may not be real, but we feel it. And our definition of the good parent, or what they think the good parent is, comes to the fore. So in public or in a family gathering, we might respond in ways that we wouldn't if we're alone with the child, because we're responding to that perceived judgment as opposed to what we actually know is best in the situation. That's something I think everyone has felt and is absolutely universal. And I think there are two ways that I can think of to shift that. One is to really practice our new thinking patterns so that we focus on the child and what we know is best for that child. And that matters so much more than some stranger's judgment of me. And two, I think what you're doing, and that is trying to shift the perception of what is a good parent. When I was a child, a good parent would smack the child. So that was very common in stores and lineups, everywhere. Kids were getting hit all the time. And that was the perception of what a good parent does. So a good parent takes control. A good parent shows them who's boss. A good parent, makes sure that child gets the message. And that usually meant hitting. That is definitely shifting, and what you're doing is shifting it more, so that now we're starting to think that good parents talk to their children, good parents teach their children, good parents treat their children with respect and explain and help them learn. And so if we can shift that social pressure, or that perceived social pressure of, if that was my kid, I'd give him a good swift, if that's what we hear in our minds' ears, and if we can shift that like you are doing, so that people in the public, instead of feeling like we're being judged by them and that there's this pressure to coerce and to become aggressive toward the child, instead, if we can shift that so that we perceive the people around us as being supportive and empathic and understanding, and we do that by doing that with our children. So what we want to create is a generation of adults who are empathic and non-aggressive and good communicators and know how to step up and help and not be bystanders to bullying, basically. Right. So that's what we're trying to help children learn. And so that over time, the social environment is not one of judgment, pressure, and aggression, but one of understanding and empathy and respect and support. Yeah. And then we'll have a very different world for children and for parents.
It's so true, right? It's almost that when we get clarity, even if it wasn't modeled for us, it's getting that clarity that allows us then to move into that space where even if we might feel judged and we might have those old messages in our head, we're able to override those old messages and instead move forward in what's best. So, which helps us move into sort of the next thing is, how can we help parents who are here today get that clarity, to get the clarity on what their long-term goals are that you've talked about, so that when they're in that space of that pull to control or that pull to be the good parent in front of other people, that they can lock into their child and their long-term goals as parents.
Well, one thing that we do in our program, very close to the beginning, is to take parents through an exercise where they first imagine the typical situation in every home around the world in the morning when the whole family has to get out the door by a certain time, usually quite early, and the child is not getting ready quickly enough, maybe is getting caught up in other activities, getting distracted, and the frustration quickly rises and the coercion escalates because the parent has so much pressure to get to work, the child to school, and so on and so on. And if we can get connected to the feelings that we feel in that situation, then we can see what's really happening inside of us, which is it's a reaction in our brain. It's really adaptive response that we have to a feeling of being out of control, a feeling of threat. And when that happens, we go into fight or flight. And so that's a good thing. If you see a snake or somebody's coming at you with a weapon, or there's some large, really loud, unexpected noise or something, it's very adaptive. It's very good that we go into fight or flight because our body prepares prepares us to either run as fast as we can, faster than we ever thought was humanly possible when we're in that state, or to take on that threat and defend ourselves and fight it off. That's great if it's a bear, but when it's a little child, it's not good. But it's the same reaction. That is an instinctive reaction to threat. So what we need to do is overcome that. And we can only overcome it if we become really aware of it and realize that it's not that we're bad, and it's not that the child is bad. It's that there's a conflict right now, and that's our brain's response to it. If we become aware of it, we can start to moderate it. And one of the ways that we help parents to work toward that is to now have them close their eyes and visualize that child at the age of 20. And think about what the child is going to look like. Think about, who that young adult is going to be, and what we hope they will be as people. So what kind of characteristics do we want them to have? What kind of people do we hope they'll be? And what kind of relationship do we hope to have with them? And when we refocus like that, first of all, we really calm down. Yeah. And we also become really conscious of what we're actually aiming for in terms of the child's character, the child's qualities as a person. And we've done this all over the world, literally. And what we found is everywhere we go, parents hope that their children will be empathic, nonviolent, non-aggressive, kind, honest, responsible, and they hope that they will be their children's best friends when they're grown. So they hope to nurture a really strong, trusting relationship. And parents often say, we want to be the people our children come to when they have difficulties. We want them to come to us. We want to be their wise mentors. And then we think about all the things that we're doing and how all those things are interfering with that process.
Can I say something and just ask you a little bit about this image? Because so I know there's a dad here who's got a 3-month-old, and I remember when my baby was that little, I could dream up this ideal child. However, some of us have children that are older that have special needs, like maybe they have autism, or maybe they have some sensory processing issues, or maybe we've adopted or we're a foster parent and they have a history of trauma. And so sometimes what happens is we start to feel worried that the image is there, but it's a negative image. It's a fear that my child's going to grow up and become, what do we do with that negative list of, they'll become truant, or they'll use drugs, or they'll become like a criminal, or like, those are real genuine thoughts parents have. They usually come to me, and that's the first thing that comes out in the first session is an enormous fear. What do you say about how to be with those fears?
I think all parents have those fears. And I think that's another thing that feeds into the aggressive responses. I've heard so many times, if I don't hit my child when he's 3, he'll be in jail when he's 16. That's just such a common belief. But so what we're trying to do is move away from all the fear, because it's the fear that feeds into the need to control, to every little thing that happens. You see this movie unfold in your mind. So, the child's having a tantrum, and you're standing there watching this child, and this movie unfolds in your mind that ends up with them being in terrible trouble, and all kinds of disaster down the road because the 3-year-old is having a tantrum.
Yes.
And so what we want to do is stop that movie, because it's a false movie. It's a movie based on fear. And to really rethink, like start over, scratch that, start over, and let's unfold the movie that leads to where we want it to lead.
When you said that, you took a breath, you know. I'm sort of thinking it's sort of like moving from one state of arousal where I fear that my child's going to be a serial killer or something,
Yeah,
you know, honestly,
yeah, yeah.
to you know, or they're going to get in juvie hall, to taking in breath and realizing a lot of those visions of the future are driven by arousal, by the stress response, that
Yes.
those fears actually are driven by a physiological state.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So if
Yeah.
you breathe and you do a long exhale and you get into that
Hmm.
dreamy, safe place and your body feels safe, then you start thinking about just how sweet it is. And your son is older now. And,
He's
you
older
know,
now, and yeah, and if I had envisioned back then what kind of person he would be, that's who he is. And what I wanted was kindness and respectfulness and joy and empathy,
yeah,
and that was my hope, for the kind of adult he would grow into.
yes.
And now he is there, and he is those things. And so what we're wanting to do is shift from the fear-based reactions to the real goal-oriented responses. So if I'm driven by a fear that my child's going to end up in prison, I'm going to react in ways that are irrational to the behavior that's actually happening before me. So
Yeah.
it's often tantrums. And tantrums are developmentally normative. They're universal. Every child has them. And if we understand where that is coming from, which
Mm,
is the stress response and over arousal and not knowing what to do with it, just like it is with us, then
yes.
we start to see ourselves, instead of just compounding that and doing it right back at them because we want to control what they can't control, then what we want to do is shift that. So we start to show them, how do you deal with that arousal? I'm feeling it too. How do I deal with it so that I can gradually get on top of it and respond in constructive ways that don't hurt myself or other people? And we do that by seeing that tantrum not unfurling into landing in juvie, but seeing that tantrum as this is step one in learning how to deal with emotions. So, what do I want him to be able to do when he's 20 with his emotions? I want him to be able to acknowledge them, respect them, name them, and be able to talk about them and deal with them in a way that's constructive, not suppress them, which is what happens when we start acting aggressively toward them, and then they don't know how to deal with them. So then when they feel frustrated, it all comes out with their partners. What we want is them to be able to understand themselves and be able to recognize emotion and to have skills in dealing with difficult emotions so that they have happy relationships later in life and healthy relationships where they can talk and they can regulate and they can listen and they can communicate. And they don't learn that when we clamp down out of fear. So
Yeah.
we
Yes.
have to work at kind of reprogramming our brains, because a lot of our programming comes from our parents too, who tried to control us, and a lot of us are not good at recognizing, naming, and dealing with emotions, which is another contributing factor to that scene of control and aggression.
Yes. I want to ask, I think we have some parents that have some questions, Amy, that might bring this into a little bit more of an application or make it practical for people to kind of get hold of. I can't hear you. Your volume is off. Not, you're good,
I
Joan.
was I was trying to respond to people in the text, and I didn't want you to hear me typing. So thank you for letting me know you couldn't hear me. So we have a couple of questions. I was trying to get a little more clarity about what they were asking. So one mom here has a 12-year-old son who is autistic, and she says for him, so she wants to know. She says, I find that a child without severe trauma is easier to adapt to parenting shifts. I have a 12-year-old son who is autistic, and he shuts down and is black and white when discipline is being laid out, even discipline that is specific to healthy habits. For example, we are walking each day to swim practice, or not understanding that as an adult, I see he needs movement. He's angry. I tell him that movement is essential for his mood, anxiety, relationships. So what do you say and do before he gets angry? He gets angry when he's being pulled away from screens or when they have to go for a walk. She's wondering what it looks like in that moment when he is angry, I think is what she's asking. What should she do in that moment?
From a perspective of having long-term goals.
For the perspective of long-term goals,
yeah.
Yes.
I think the long-term goals can really guide that. So what are you hoping he'll be able to do with his anger eventually? Where do you want to get with that? What's your goal, your vision for how he will eventually be better at managing his anger? And that's really true for all children, not only children with autism. I think it may be more intense, more rapid escalation in some cases, and the communication may be more challenging. But it's the same process of helping children become aware of their emotions, name their emotions, and be able to learn how to regulate them. So, some of the processes may be the same as we would do with ourselves. And one of the big things is to know what's coming. So if we can, actually, I think that Amy and Robbyn just posted this morning something on triggers, becoming aware of the things that trigger our own anger. That could help him too. So if you can help him recognize the things that set it off, and then help to prepare for that. Now, it's a little bit tricky here because I don't know your child, and I don't know what information processing issues he might have. I don't know anything about your life or your relationship, so it's a little bit of a reach to try to give advice in a certain case. But thinking in terms of a kind of a principle, what do I want to see down the road? Where do I want to get to? And then what can I build in to help us get there step by step? And it's always step by step. It's never, with any child, it's never, I do this and it's fixed. It's a matter of, we call it scaffolding. So you try to figure out where he is now. What's he able to handle? What situations of frustration has he shown an ability to handle better without the angry outburst? What was present in those situations that you could use to build into the situations that are more challenging? Where do you see a slight improvement, and how do you build on that? Knowing him, what do you think that he needs? What kind of support in the situation do you think he needs in order to help him regulate? What we're trying to do is move ourselves and our children from that state of high arousal where everything's on high alert and you're responding with what appears to be anger, but it's the stress response. It is anger, but it's frustration is what's behind it. And so how do we reconstruct the situation, whether it's us with our child or our child being moved from one activity to another? How do we build in the support to improve that step by step? So there's no pat answer, because each situation is different. But in general, if you think in terms of moving him along a scaffold or up a ladder, step by step, so you're not going from here to here with one response, but with each response, you're moving a little bit farther and recognizing that, letting yourself recognize that was better. That was better.
Yeah. So, and she said she really appreciated your answer. She says, So most importantly, I need to recognize that it's not the specific issue, but rather the long-term end result and what we need to focus on for his adult life.
Yeah.
And that's
Yes,
exactly it.
exactly.
You know, and if
Yeah.
he's too frustrated, then you just have to go back down a little bit and get back to that place where he's a little maybe stretched without being over the top. You
Yeah.
know, and you just have to go step by step, just like Dr. Durrant was saying. So,
And we call it co-regulation. So if you visualize a situation where you may be under stress, you need to get the child away from this and to this, and it needs to happen quickly. So you have to get him away from the TV and to the dinner table, for example.
Right.
And so you're
Or
feeling
off the screen, as actually, this is her
yeah,
example,
off the screen.
which is huge for children that are dysregulated or have autism. She's trying to get him off the screen to get him to do something physical.
Huge for all children, actually.
yes.
And some adults I know.
Most adults, I would say. So you have to get from here, which is highly reinforcing in terms of its effect on the brain. It's dopamine is flowing. He's feeling this achievement and challenge and mastery. It's something he's really enjoying. It's a state of pleasure.
Yeah.
And then he has to leave that and move to something that may be either less pleasurable or even challenging for him.
Yes.
So, and that would be the case if a little child is drawing and needs to go to bed, or if we're, I don't know, we're having playoffs in hockey here right now, you know, and you're in the third period and somebody says, you have to drive me to the mall or something.
Oh.
It's hard to get that adult away from the screen. So if we can think of what that feels like, it helps. If we see that as non-compliance, we get threatened, we go into the stress response. If we see it as, I can understand what's going on with him because I feel that way when this, I'm in this parallel situation. Then we can start to think about what would help us. What would help us? And some things are preparation, communication beforehand, building in some kind of balance so that, if we have to do this now, well, we can get back to it in 20 minutes or something like that. Or, I don't know, some kind of something that will help him regulate the anxiety about and the frustration of having to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then rather than me stressing out, him stressing out, and the two of us escalating that until we're in a real battle, we think, okay, what does he need in order to learn how to regulate that? It's not this situation right now that matters so much. What really matters is what he learns in that situation to help move him toward an ability to regulate over the long term. So if I can regulate my emotions, I can help him regulate his. And that's the process of co-regulation. And if you think about that in the situation, okay, how can I help him? How can we co-regulate? You will very quickly move into a more relaxed state. You'll breathe differently. Your voice will be different. And you'll speak to him in a way that might help him make that transition. If we come at them with anger, frustration, and control,
Worry.
they don't want to be with us then, and
Right.
they can get more engaged in what they're doing because they want to shut us out. Nobody wants that.
Right.
You resist it.
Right.
So if my husband says to me, "Come on, we have to get out the door now," I'm in the middle of just finishing a fantastic, brilliant thought I'm writing or something, and he comes in angry. I don't want anything to do with what he wants to do.
Right.
So, and it creates more resistance. So how do we figure this out together? How do we bring the child in so that we can work together to get better and better and better at this thing that's causing difficulties for everyone?
Right. Like we have to connect with them so we can collaborate with them. right? And we have to model all those things,
Yeah, connection.
which can be really hard if they weren't modeled for us.
Yes.
But
Very
don't
hard.
worry, you can still do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. What I love about it too is when you were talking about wondering, um, you're talking about wondering, well, first of all, wondering what it's like for them to be on the screen. So he's on the screen. What does that feel like? So you're using empathy there. Just like that really helps me to think about, okay, to get curious about what it's like for that child and what it would be, and then to be thinking about what would I need if I was him, to let go of the screen puts me in a place of feeling very close to the child, even though I'm also at the same time frustrated with the child, which is kind of interesting,
Mhm.
but it sort of softens that kind of moving over into the child's world actually makes me feel less worried about getting to work on time.
Me
Mhm.
too. We have another question that I think is interesting. So they want to know, is there an age that tantrums become no longer developmentally appropriate? We are still dealing with a lot of tantrums from my 9-year-old.
Mhm. Yeah, that it probably is unusual among 9-year-olds. However, many adults still have tantrums, and often what we're doing in some situations with our children is our own version of a tantrum. So what a tantrum is, it's a feeling of being overwhelmed by emotion and not knowing what to do with it. So they start usually young, around 2, 3, very common, 2 to 5, even 6-year-olds old. A lot of children are still having tantrums because there are a number of reasons, but it has to do with brain development. So if our brains are gradually getting interconnected over the years. It takes years and years and years, up to 30 years, for everything to be connected. So one of the first areas to develop, in fact, we're born with it, and that's why babies cry so much, is the emotional system, and it's deep inside the brain, and it's what reacts to intense feelings. So anger and fear and love and joy and embarrassment and humiliation and excitement and anticipation, they're all being felt right in the middle of our brain. If you put rods through my head like this, they would intersect where my emotional system is. So it's very well protected in there because that's our fight or flight. It's our survival mechanism. But our ability to reason through all of that and to say, well, if I react that way, it could cause this to happen, or, I'll just calm myself and think this through. That's all up here in our frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is the last part of the brain to fully develop. And it isn't actually fully developed until we're in our mid-20s, at least. And usually through adulthood, it's developing more and more and more. We get better and better and better at regulating ourselves, at understanding outcomes of our actions, all that kind of thing. It keeps growing throughout our life. What we need to do is wire the emotional system to the frontal lobe. We have to literally build pathways between those two parts of our brains. And that can happen through a couple of ways. If we respond to our children's emotion with arousal, with high arousal, then we're not helping build those connections to the frontal lobe, which is calm and reasonable and rational. If we respond with communication, with teaching, with guidance, with explanation, we're building that pathway from the emotion to the reasoning, to the thinking, to the talking. Now, you're probably doing that. But if you can think of it in those terms, that what we need to do here is build those connections between the highly aroused emotion system to the cool, rational frontal lobe, then how could we react or respond in those situations to help that happen? One of the things that helps is language, connecting the emotion that is just, behavior the stamping and the throwing yourself on the floor and the pounding and the crying, that's pure emotion. That's not language. If we can put words to that, we start to build that connection to thinking it through. We think through with words. So if we can talk to the child afterwards, make sure the child feels safe, and then talk to the child afterwards about what that felt like. What was that about? What brought it on? What are the frustrations that piled up that led to that? And then when I feel frustrated, what can I do to help myself deal with that in a way that actually is much more constructive, that will accomplish much more? A tantrum doesn't accomplish much in the end. It just, in fact, it can really lead to a lot of unpleasantness in the whole climate. What do we really want to accomplish? What does the child actually need? And maybe what the child needs is help with putting words to this feeling, help with finding other ways to get their needs met. I think that by 9, you've got enough language to be able to talk that through and really say, we've got something here that we think we can do better. You're trying to communicate something to us, but we can't really hear you when it's communicated like that. Let's think of better ways to communicate what you need so we can talk it through. And help that to happen. Again, it's going to be gradual because this has been a long-term sort of way of trying to express needs and emotions. So how can we gradually mentor that child in more constructive ways of dealing with frustration? Tantrums usually are frustration. In fact, there was another great thing in the material you sent out this morning, Amy and Robbyn, about the 5 causes of tantrums, and they were fatigue and I can't remember what they were, but maybe you could send that to somehow to the people who participated.
Yes,
it's
I
really
think
helpful.
Right.
And it can start doing some detective work, even with the child, to figure out what is happening in those situations, and what's happening in situations where the child deals with it well. Maybe
I love that you talk about detective work because I feel like that shifts us as parents out of the role of like controlling and being the behavioral, the warden or the, you know what I mean, the disciplinarian in the old-fashioned way, but more that we're really just trying to really use our own prefrontal cortex to understand what were the things that led up. Like with the 9-year-old, what does she know in her body ahead of time that it's coming on? Do you know when she's starting to not feel well? Is there a way for her to communicate to you? Does she know what she needs that you could do differently that would feel better for her? A lot of the things about tantrums too is just our general lifestyle. I think children tantrum because the pacing of our lives, and we want to correct their tantrum rather than looking at, okay, what is it about our lifestyle that's actually kind of consistently overwhelming a child's stress response? And the other thing I wanted to just say is all behavior is appropriate. It just may not be the most adaptable, but you can look at all of the behaviors your children have as adaptive to their environment, their best attempt to adapt. So if your child's having tantrums at 9, that's fine. That's happening. And just to accept it, and then to be like what Joan is saying, to be a sleuth and to try to be more of a detective, to understand.
One thing,
I like that.
We have a strong tendency in our cultures here in North America to think in terms of reinforcement and punishment. And sometimes the first place your head goes is, I must be reinforcing these tantrums. And when you think about that, then what you tend to do is withdraw or punish. And that doesn't usually help. If we can get away from thinking on those terms of reinforcing and punishing, if we can think in terms of what's going on inside the child. And, you know, there are many things that feed into this. Some children have more tantrums than others because they're more intense. They feel things more intensely. They express things more intensely. My son is very intense and still is. When he's happy, is he ever happy? And when he's sad, is he ever sad? And other children are much less so. There's less of a range of intensity. And so if a child really feels and expresses emotion intensely, then they're probably going to have more tantrums because they're going to feel and express frustration more intensely. Some children also have more facility with language, and other children have less access to words. It's just information processing differences. Less access to words.
You're normalizing it, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's true of us all. And if we think about the days when we come home from work or whatever we're doing, and for one reason or another, we have a meltdown. And it happens to all of us. We just are overwhelmed by stress. And what's behind it? What does it feel like? And what do we need from the people around us? And if we go by the reward and punishment model, that would tell us what we need from the people we love most is for them to ignore us, or to lock us in our rooms, or to tell us, we don't want to deal with you when you're like this. What does that do? What does that do to us? What does that do to our relationship with them? What does that do to our trust? What does that do to our capacity to learn how to manage that better? What we probably need is for them to say, wow, what's going on? Let's talk about this. How can I help? Let's figure this out. Let's find a way to manage this situation. And maybe there are changes we need to make. Maybe there's too much stress in your life. Maybe you just need to let it out. Maybe you're really tired. Maybe you're coming down with something. Maybe when this happens, you're always really hungry. Maybe let's figure it out. And if they sit with you and say, I understand, I felt like this too, let's think of what can help.
Yeah, it's like, in a way, what you're saying is that I have tantrums too.
Yes. It is.
You know, as adults, we have like more modified, or we tantrum when the children aren't around. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we tantrum in front of our children. But we all have dysregulation. We all lose it. We all get really upset. So it's nice to think about, like, how do we help each other?
I have to say that I work with a lot of 9-year-olds who still tantrum.
I do too.
And a lot of 40-year-olds who still tantrum, and sometimes in my office, and that's okay.
Yeah.
One thing I do that I think has been helpful, both for myself and for some clients and friends, is when as a mom, if I'm getting frustrated and my kid is having a tantrum or having just a really hard time, I might be like, not when they're tantruming, but like when they won't do anything. And I might go, I'm really frustrated, and I don't even know what to do. Because that language of having a feeling and not knowing what to do can be really helpful for a young child.
Yeah.
I'm having some really big body and emotional experiences, and I don't know what to do. Because it's really simple.
Yeah.
You know, it's I don't understand, and I don't know what to do. And that is a signal, right, where we breathe and get regulated ourselves, and we co-regulate, like what Dr. Durrant and Robbyn also has talked about in the past, so that they can get calm, and then we have that learning time where they get more language.
Yes. Sometimes less language is a lot better.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes you just need a
yes. Yeah, or just have, the other person look at you in the eyes and feel you.
Yeah.
And breathe.
Yeah.
Yes.
What we're learning
a pause is big, taking a pause.
In the old days, a lot of people would have said, but then you're reinforcing the tantrum. And what we're learning from neuroscience is that the separation in moments of emotional intensity actually it doesn't make anything better. What makes things better is connecting. we've somehow gotten ourselves so that we label that as you're giving in, or you're rewarding, or you're spoiling, or whatever. But what it's doing actually is developing the child's brain architecture, and it's also affecting your relationship. So if every time I have a really bad day and I break down in tears at home, and my husband says, go to your room until you can come out and deal with this normally, and then doesn't talk to me about it, I don't learn anything from that except, wow, he doesn't like me very much. And then I get more anxious because I don't know where I'm safe. I don't know where I can express myself. I don't know who I can go to help me deal with this. But if he comes to me and gives me a hug and says, let's talk about it, just let's let it out. And then when you can have, sit down, have a cup of tea and talk about it, I feel 1,000 times better.
Yes.
I
imagine him hugging you.
Pardon me?
I imagine him hugging you.
Yeah.
Or just holding your hand, just letting you have your experience and not having to do anything.
Yeah. And what that teaches me is that I have someone in my life I can trust to understand and meet my needs, and that alone will lower my arousal, lower my stress, lower my frustration, and take me a big step toward regulating. I will instantly start to feel calmer. My behavior might not show it, but I'll be feeling it inside, and I'll settle sooner. And that relationship has been so strengthened, so that next time maybe I won't cry as hard, or I'll come to him sooner, or he'll be able to recognize it starting and say, oh, something's bothering you. Let's talk about it before I melt down. Maybe, like you said, he can start to recognize the signs of this starting to happen and step in with support, with like a hammock, an emotional hammock that can help to lessen the intensity of the expression before it starts to happen. So the more we can do to identify the things that are triggering these kinds of meltdowns, or what places where we can step in to prevent and regulate, start the regulation before the arousal is up here.
Yes,
then
it's a lot harder once it's up there, right?
It is.
Yeah. We used to have a saying in our family, if somebody started to kind of get irritated easily, whoop, low blood sugar, we better eat.
Yes.
And that was really helpful. And we still all now do that. We think, oh, I'm starting to feel easily irritated. Yeah, I think I should eat something. And it prevents so much unnecessary, just blood sugar fueled stuff that you don't even need. Like it's a total waste of everything, a waste of time, waste of love, a waste of
energy, right? Yeah.
And instead you could be doing something really fun and constructive and positive.
Enjoyable.
So sometimes if you can just identify what creates that vulnerability, you can step in, and then it doesn't have to happen, and then you change that whole pattern over time.
And the more regulating experiences we have and our children have, the more they're learning those skills, because their brain goes, oh, I'm upset and I'm calm. I'm upset and I'm calm. I can recover, right?
And they can start to recognize what triggers it too, so that they can start to learn strategies for, another way of dealing with it that might be, will meet their needs better.
And meeting our own needs better. Yeah. We are out of time, I think. We are out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, this has been wonderful. It's really been fun. I've been able to see some of the comments as they've gone along, which has been really, really great to see. And the questions have been wonderful. And I hope that there's been something helpful, constructive that's come from this conversation for those of you out there that we can't see. And I guess just the main thing I would say is that we're all in this together, and that, you know, the three of us are here as so-called experts, but we're just parents that maybe have dedicated, we've had the luxury of being able to dedicate some time to becoming really aware of what's going on in these situations, being able to put words to that and sharing that in hopes that it can be helpful to others.
Yes, thank you.
We're all in it together.
Yes, it's so true, and we all need to be in it together.
Yeah.
It's so helpful. Robbyn, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, that was great. I feel like I have a lot to think about. It was a wonderful conversation. I have so much appreciation for you, Joan, and your work. And yes, you're a mother, but you're also the leading researcher in corporal punishment in Canada. You've done enormous work internationally, training people all over the world on positive discipline and everyday parenting. I'm actually trained in her model. I love it. It's beautiful. It's free. It's online. And I just think you're just a beautiful light in this world, and I really appreciate your time and your compassion.
That's lovely.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, me too. So thank you for being here today, parents. I know it really means a lot to take time out of your busy day to come and listen and learn. So I really want to thank you for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Durrant, for being here. Robbyn, it's always a pleasure to work with you, and I'm so thankful that you've joined me on our 5th annual event. So yes. Thank you.
Very exciting. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.